West of the Rockies, your army. Hello.
Y2K. How can we prepare?
Dump a few of their machines and radios. Throw them in the back for a few hours.
Fighting for our lives, family must survive.
5 years. Air, water, base.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Telegram, and Rumble. Oh, also Odyssey and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is February the 23rd, 2023, and this is episode 260 of the Workshop Podcast. So, how the heck is everyone out there? We have finally hit a cold snap here, so, we had a few cold days all winter, but today has been the coldest, just about the coldest day of the winter. So, hey, who do we got? Renegade Butcher. Hello, Clark Deacon. We got you in here as well. This evening, we're going to talk about the lowly 2-liter pop bottle. That's right. I said liters because even my imperial friends south of the border call them 2-liter pop bottles, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, let's get our housekeeping out of the way, and then we will jump right in. Number one, it is Thursday, so that means it is time to remember our sponsor, my buddy Joel Riles from Fortress Canine from the Protection Dog Podcast. And you might say, well, what do I need to know about protection dogs? Well, let me tell you. Joel, like a phoenix, has risen from the ashes. He's built a life for him and a business for him that is just unbelievable. He is a great dude. He's an inspiring dude that if you need a verbal kick to the ass saying, hey, why aren't you doing what you're doing? Give him a listen. He is in all the places. But most importantly, if you want to give him a follow and you're looking to add some more podcasts to your feed, go by fortresscanine.com and give Joel a subscribe and let him know that I sent you there. That would be great. Now, the next one, I finally got dates for you here, guys. But May 28th and 29th of this year, of course, May 28th, 29th, I'm going to be in Addy, Washington at the Thrivalist Fair. I'm rather excited. They contacted me and asked if I wanted to speak. It's about a day's drive from Alberta, where I am. So, it was a no-brainer. I'm always looking to get out and see new communities. Well, it is a place where people are self-reliant. They're looking for independence. They're looking to figure things out on their own. So it's a place that the workshop community would fit in really, really well. It's $50 for the entire weekend for a whole family. There's also camping that you can rent as well, but just to go, I'm really excited to be there. I'm going to be speaking on entrepreneurship both days, as well as home maintenance, preparedness both days. But here's the thing. I just got in contact with them, and 4 different people so far have reached out to me from the workshop community and said, hey, I'd like to go. So the link will be in the description tonight. It's not there yet, but I will put it there for you. And if you're going to go, we're going to have on the evening, I believe it's a Sunday evening. I think it's a Sunday, Monday event. But anyway, the one evening that we're there, we've got one of their fire pit areas booked. So we're going to have a workshop get together, which I'm excited for. If there's just 2 of us, if there's 4 of us, if there's 100, I don't care. But we can sit around, we can, tell stories, drink some bourbon. I'll bring the bourbon, I promise. And it would just be fun to in-person meetup. So anybody who wants to do that or is excited or maybe interested, let me know. I'll make sure you get tickets. And for any of my fellow Canucks, they are going to offer the price at Canadian dollars. So that's like $4 American if you do the conversion. So Clark says, I love these empty container episodes. I always learn new things. I do too, putting them together. So it's kind of fun. And finally, guys, I got to say thanks for the workshop radio. It was a blast on Sunday. Nicole and I had a great time, learned a lot. This edition went off with almost out a hitch, and I felt like it was a much smoother kind of situation, even with the live interludes in between. So definitely something we're going to do again. If you're interested, let me know. There is at toolmantim.co/workshop radio. If you'd like to sign up for the next one, go there. There'll be a link where you can upload your segment. 15 minutes. That is the length. If you want to be in on it, let me know. And we're going to go from there. So Renegade Butcher says, be careful with those open containers. Oh, yeah, and I suppose, anybody want to know what I'm drinking this evening? Angel's Envy. We got it on the rocks. So the missus picked that up for me as a Valentine's Day present, and it's been pretty good so far. Very smooth. So we have covered so far 5-gallon buckets, milk crates, IBC totes, and mason jars. So if you're like, wow, I didn't know Tim was doing an empty container series. Well, if you didn't, go back, dig through the podcasts. I can definitely share the links if you need them. But it's been a lot of fun. You know, it's one of those things where we kind of go through the history of an item, and then we go through some of the uses, some of the cool, weird, useless accessories that we can find from Amazon. And I even pulled up a couple of vintage 1970s commercials we're going to play tonight, just because we can. So it should be kind of fun. So let's dive in this evening into 2-liter pop bottles. And I joke, but it is kind of funny that it's one of the only things sold in the U.S. that actually comes in a metric measurement. So we'll dive into why that is. But so if anybody was wondering where in the hell the 2-liter bottle came from, maybe I'm the only one, but I sure as shit love to find out the history behind these ubiquitous kind of items, things that you just, you know, the type of thing that in the 80s we would just throw it out the window, but you know, it's just garbage, it's background noise, right? So, and yes, Renegade Butcher says, have you ever seen the spiral cutters that cut 2-liter bottles into monofilament? I have, and we're going to talk about that too. I think it's kind of cool. So, hey, Byron Roberts, Pepsi was the first company to introduce the 2-liter pop bottle. Clark, I forgot to add that one to my list, Morgan's air conditioner. So we will, I already spoiled it for him. He said, we'll see if it's on the list. It's not. I have 41 uses of the 2-liter pop bottle, and that one's not on there. So we'll add that to number 42. So in the early 70s, the 2-liter pop bottle became something that Pepsi, well, there's a whole story behind it. So Pepsi was losing market share, or was, they looked at the 6.5 ounce bottle that Coke had out there, and it was very distinctive. You know, it had that hourglass shape that everybody knows. They still know it. And Pepsi's like, damn, we need our own Coke bottle, except for Pepsi. So they hired this, they hired a guy as a VP. His name's John Scully. He ended up, if you're like, that name sounds kind of familiar. Well, the dude is the guy who kind of pushed or moved Steve Jobs out of Apple in 1984. So he went from Pepsi to Apple. The dude was a genius. So anyway, they brought him in, and he's like, we need to come up with our own distinctive design. We want a glass bottle to compete with Coke's 6.5 ounce container. Well, they did a ton of research, and the market research came back to them, and they're like, hey, you know what we actually need? Larger bottles. They weren't really a thing back then. You know, you just had the small little bottles. You put your quarter in, you opened up the machine, and you just pulled one out. You could take as many as you wanted, but it was on the honor system back in the day. So they discovered, actually, to set themselves apart, we're going to try something like a 2-liter pop bottle. And you're like, well, okay, that doesn't explain why it's a 2-liter, but we'll get into that. So they first designed, of course, a glass 2-liter pop bottle. That's what they brought in. And that was one of those things they're like, because, of course, coming out of the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, people weren't necessarily used to these massive corn syrupy jugs of goodness, carbonated goodness. So they needed to introduce it to the world. So let's start. I got to show you guys this. Now, if you're on the audio, I really hope it picks up. I don't know if the Prepper broadcast feed will pick it up, but I think you guys will enjoy this. This is a 30-second commercial from 1978 when they first introduced the glass 2-liter pop bottle, and I got a kick out of it. So let me bring it up here for you, and let's go.
Today we're going to do the metric system. All right. What's 2 liters? Rocky. This is 2 liters. The no returnable, resealable 2-liter bottle from Pepsi-Cola. It's bigger than 2 quarts. That's the cheapest way you can buy Pepsi.
Pepsi-Cola's 2-liter returnable
Love the guy's
bottle
New York
adds up
accent.
to
It
real
cracks me up.
savings because you get more refreshing Pepsi for your money. And because it's refillable, you pay only for the Pepsi, not the bottle. Pepsi-Cola's 2-liter bottle.
There it is. You
It's
can
the
see
most
that
economical
kind
way to
of
buy
looks
Pepsi.
like a, what do you want to call it? A pop bottle style. Looks like the Colt 45 beer bottles that we used to get in high school that we would not drink whatsoever. So there you go. So that was the first one. So it was kind of funny, but I love the advertising end of the history and how a company's like, hey, we got a new product. How are we going to sell it to the general masses? And in this case, they're like, hey, look, here's the biggest way to get Pepsi, and it costs less because you don't have to pay for the bottle. So that was the big selling point, was it's refundable or returnable. And in his New York accent, when he says returnable, it sounds like something different if you caught that. So anyway, and Pepsi had growlers. Pretty darn close. Hey, Rachel Brown, good to have you. Clark says, I don't know if the 6.5 bottles were not recyclable. I think they were. I'll have to ask my dad. But their big selling point was, look how big it is. You can, Byron says 40 ounces of malt liquor. You can take it home and, I want to say feed your whole family. But anyway, so they were the ones that started it. They brought it out. Now, of course, the glass had an issue, which you guys can all probably figure out. But soon after they started coming out with the glass, the VP, John Scully, went back and he's like, listen, I think we need to design something that doesn't break the second you push it over. And we're going to talk about a lawsuit that happened in there anyway. So, so he reached out to DuPont, of course, DuPont, who is like the company for plastics, a guy named Nathaniel Wythe. He ended up receiving the patent in 1973, which I thought was kind of cool. And so I'm going to show you this because since I like doing my research and this kind of shit has got me really interested lately, check this out right here. This is the original patent from 1973. You can see it. It looks like a pop bottle. It looks like basically what we expect, maybe a little closer to a growler, Rachel Brown. And she says size matters. And yes, that's what she said. So there's the whole idea. We're going to talk about that a little bit more further down, but I thought that was kind of cool. So if you I don't know if I can zoom in on that. There you go. Look at that. In about 4 days from now, it'll be 50 years since the original 2-liter pop bottle was patented. So there you go. I thought that was kind of cool. And from there, they discovered, holy crap, this plastic pop bottle is pretty incredible. You can basically drop it on the floor. It doesn't break. We can ship it. We're not going to lose in shipping. The grocery stores are going to be like, wow, we're not worried about projectile glass flying out everywhere. So again, John Scully, being the dude that he was, he's like, I need to sell this. So he went to a little guy named Sam Walton. Anybody know who Sam Walton is out there? I'm going to give you a second to see if you can figure it out. And if you're listening in the audio while I take a drink of bourbon. But if you don't catch it, he was the owner/founder of Walmart. Just a little bit. Yeah, so half a century ago, about 5 days away from the half-century anniversary of the introduction of the 2-liter pop bottle. Rachel Brown got it, Walmart. Yes, so Sam Walton had a little tiny franchise in the 70s called Walmart. And so the CEO of Pepsi went there and he's like, hey, Sam, of course I'm paraphrasing at this point. He's like, we'd like you to put our bottles, our pop, in your store. And he's like, well, what's special about it? He goes, let me show you. So he goes to hand it to him and he accidentally drops the bottle on the floor and it bounces. It does not shatter. So you don't get projectile, carbonated glass flying everywhere and him needing to call in for help to get it cleaned up. He's blown away. So he asks him, he's like, what the hell is this thing made out of? And he explains it's PET plastic, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I have a story that reminds me exactly of this. Quite a few years ago, I walk into a Home Depot. I'm looking for new light bulbs. The guy hits me up that works here. He's like, hey, have you seen these new LED light bulbs? And I'm like, well, no, I don't. He takes it and he goes, watch. And he throws it at the ground and the damn thing bounces. And for a second, my heart skipped a beat thinking, well, there goes glass everywhere. But it didn't because it was plastic. So that was what reminded me of that. So he goes in and he says, hey, Sammy, I'd like you to carry our pop in the 2-liter plastic bottles. And he said, sure. And they beat Coke to the market by 2 years. And if you guys remember those early 2-liter pop bottles, I didn't bring up a picture, but the earliest ones weren't really good. They weren't super self-contained. So they were plastic with a plastic cup on the bottom. They were actually 2 pieces and the bottom plastic was a little different. So anyway, the big deal behind the whole thing was retailers hated carrying those 2-liter pop bottles because every time some stupid kid would walk down the aisle, he'd tap the bottle, and as soon as it fell over, it wouldn't just break. So you didn't just have sticky, sugary syrup, you had glass. And the pressure rise of that turned it into a corn syrupy goodness glass bomb that just went boom everywhere. So it was a huge problem. So Sam Walton said, sure, let's do it. And so that was the story of how the 2-liter pop bottle came to market for Pepsi, ended up getting into the Walmart store shelves, which I thought was pretty cool. So they're like, we need to introduce this to the community, to the world. And of course, they're like, well, we sold them on the glass ones before, so let's do this. So let me show you this one. I thought this was another very ingenious commercial, even if this poor lady can't drive to save her life. But this was the introduction of Pepsi from 1978 when the plastic 2-liter pop bottles first came to market.
Pepsi-Cola's new 2-liter plastic bottle. It's tough. Really tough.
This lady was driving way too fast for a construction zone.
And besides being tough, Pepsi-Cola's new 2-liter plastic bottle is 25% lighter than glass. It's tough and light. Pepsi-Cola's new 2-liter plastic bottle.
So this time they're like, hey, you don't just get a bunch of pop, but it's tough, because I can just picture this poor lady who's taken the pop home to her family, how frustrated she'd been in the past when one of those bottles fell over and smashed in the back of her car. Now, if she just slowed the hell down and skipped some of the potholes and paid attention to the fact that there was a construction worker ahead of her, might not have been an issue. But unfortunately, she wasn't the best driver in the world, and she spilled her pop in the back. But it bounced, and of course, you can now carry 3 bottles into the house at one time instead of 2. And my brother-in-law, Barrett Bishop, said, tough car too. Absolutely. Chris Dixon says, a car commercial for the family truckster. Yes, sir. Oh, and Pledge Patriot wants to know what I'm drinking this evening. It is Angel's Envy Bourbon. So we've got 14 people in here right now. Great to have everybody. Always enjoy it. So there you go. That was kind of the history. Modern 2-liter pop bottles, they're made out of, I'm only going to pronounce this once, polyethylene terephthalate. I tried it, PET. So I'm not saying it, Renegade Butcher. He put a comment in there that I'm not going to say. So the idea behind these was they had a corrugation on the bottom that provided strength. Hey, Snail Creek Homestead, good to have you. That allowed it to stand up on its own and supported its own weight with all that carbonation in there. That was kind of cool. Now, the early ones had a separate opaque base glued to the hemispherical bottom, and a clear PET flask. You can tell I copied that from Wikipedia there, guys. So anyway, that's what it was. So in 1978, Pepsi releases the first 2-liter plastic pop bottle. 2 years later, Coke comes right behind, because Pepsi and Coke, they always followed each other. And then in 1985, they released a 3-liter pop bottle. Now, we've never had them in Canada that I've seen. Apparently, they're still a thing in the States in some places. So if anybody out there has either seen them or still sees them on the shelf, let me know in the comments, because 3 liters are kind of interesting, but I haven't personally ever seen them in real life. So, of course, all of my American friends are saying, why the hell weren't they in freedom units? Well, let me tell you. So we're going to take this quick little stroll down the history of the mundane, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. But in the late 60s was the last real push in the U.S. for the metrification of America. And we all know how well that didn't go. In 1966, the journal Metric Today was launched. And in it, they had such a dire prediction that said, if America, you guys are going to love this, if America kept resisting the global metric tsunami, if America keeps resisting the global metric tsunami it will face, as a depression would make the one in the 30s look like a Sunday picnic. So apparently, if you guys didn't accept the metric system in 1966, you were going to end up, in the Great Depression simply because you didn't convert. I don't know what the hell this person was thinking. Anyway, so the big reason why they went with 2 liters was this huge push in the late 60s through to the early 80s for the U.S. to convert to the metric system. It just was one of those things that kind of fell through the cracks. Matt Covey says they still have them at the dollar store 3 liter. And Rachel says at the Dollar Tree. And Renegade Butcher says, raise your hand if you shop at the Dollar Tree. Well, it's now the $1.25 tree here in Canada. So, yeah, here we go. All right. So from there, Jimmy Carter said, we're going to test. I can't do his voice. Anyway, he's still alive, so we won't make fun of him. But Jimmy Carter said they started testing road signs in kilometers. Interstate 19 from Tucson, Arizona to Mexico still has signs in kilometers today. So it was kind of interesting. By the 70s, automakers had begun building speedometers that showed both. And people were starting to adjust a little bit. And in 1975, and this is probably the big reason why the pop bottles today are still 2 liters, Congress passed the Metric Conversion Act, which declared metric as the preferred system, preferred loosely, of the preferred system of the United States. And the U.S. Metric Board was created to implement the conversion. How'd that go, guys? Not very much. Pipin says, I don't mind the metric system. I'm a 9mm fanboy, and I'm always looking for a 10mm socket. Yeah, well, it doesn't get any better in Canada either. Speaking of metric, today I went to hang a TV stand, and the lag bolts that came with it came from China, and they were goddamn metric lag bolts. I didn't have a nut driver to fit it. Enough said. Yeah, metric makes sense for some things, but let's move on. So anyway, there it was. So that, if you're wondering why it was 2 liter, it's basically because of the world that the bottle was launched into. It was right at the time that there was a lot of political pressure to convert the U.S. to the metric, and we all know how well that went. No big deal. So the inventor of the pop bottle, Nathaniel Wyeth, he, in 1967, he's like, I wonder if I can keep carbonated beverages in plastic bottles. Because again, like we looked at milk crates and that sort of thing, they went from glass bottles to plastic cartons and then cardboard cartons and then into plastic jugs. So this guy was like, I wonder if we can. Because I just saw a video the other day on when Walt Disney World opened. They built an all-plastic house to show how plastic was the way of the future in the 1960s. So this guy was looking. So he originally took pop, dumped it into old detergent bottles, and realized, nope, that's going to blow up. So he started experimenting with polypropylene, but eventually settled on PET, because I'm not going to try to pronounce it again. And in 1973, like I said, he got the patent. I thought it was kind of cool. I do have metric sockets. I just didn't keep them with me. So, basically the patent, I read through it. I thought it was kind of cool, but it says generally a cylindrical, oh boy, this is fun. You guys will like this. Cylindrical biaxial oriented thermal plastic bottle for bottling liquids under pressure, such as beer, soda, and aerosols, having a non-everting bottom under conditions of bottling and use. But what I thought was kind of cool was bottom construction have a continuous contact surface similar to champagne type bottles. So I thought that was cool. So there you go. That was a rather interesting journey. And then there was one more thing that happened to bring out plastic 2-liter bottles at this time. And you guys might appreciate this. And if Canada couldn't be blamed for anything else, we could be blamed for this as well. At the end of the 1970s, there was a lawsuit in Canada because these glass bottles were considered basically a pressurized container full of a very fragile material with just a lid on it. So what I didn't know was all of these returnable, refundable bottles tended to be made out of thinner glass. Like I mentioned before, if you've ever dropped a Colt 45, you'll know how thin that glass is. So what would end up happening was people would just bump, they just go boop, knock it over, and it would break. And not just break, but explode, like I've mentioned before. So one day, this 3-year-old kid was wandering through the grocery store, hopefully not by himself. I'm hoping with his family. He knocked one over. It exploded in his face. It injured his eyeball, and he eventually went blind in that eye. So his parents did what parents do, and they sued the bottling company at the time. The lawyer who represented him said, I'm not sure I believe this. I'm going to go buy a bunch of pop. So he bought dozens and dozens of what was 1.5 liter bottles at that time in Canada. He put them somewhere and just put his hand on the top. I watched an interview with him and he just knocked them over. And every single, I can't imagine this was put on the market, but every single pop bottle that he knocked over broke, except for the Coca-Cola bottles. So they figured it had something to do with the distinct design of the Coke bottles, but every other one, all the Pepsi ones and all the no-name brands, store brands, they all broke, exploded, and sent glass flying everywhere. So he fought with the companies. He said, we need to do a recall. You need to make them out of thicker glass. They said, screw you. We're going to make it out of plastic instead. So he eventually went to the newspapers, and there's a whole story behind it. So I thought, okay. So all of that came together. The confluence of the metric system, the 1960s obsession with plastic, an obscure lawsuit in Canada in the 1970s to bring us to the point we are today with an absolute overabundance of empty 2-liter pop bottles. And what the hell do we do with them? But before we do that, let's foray into the fact that I call it pop. Some of you call it soda, and a few of you even call it Coke, which I thought was rather interesting. So I dug this up on Business Insider. I had a map, but I lost it before we went live. So pop is what people say in most of the Midwest and the West. So while everybody's there live, throw out in the comments what you call that carbonated beverage that has way too much corn syrup in it in the comments so that I can know. But according to Business Insider, pop is preferred in the Midwest and the West. Soda is the preferred term in the Northeast, most of Florida, California, and pockets of the Midwest around Milwaukee and St. Louis. And then Coke, and this one gets me. I found this out years ago when my aunt went down to the Carolinas, or Georgia. It was Georgia. Coke, even if it's not a Coca-Cola brand, is what it's called in the South. So I thought, okay, so would you like a Coke? Sure, what flavor? Pepsi. Sounds good. I don't know if I have that right, but that's what it sounds like to me. And then I dug a little further. Pipin says in Florida, soda is the slang. Byron, where are you, Byron, again? He says Coke or pop. Rachel says soda. Mike says pop. Clark says pop. Renegade says he always has to give a long-winded answer because why use 2 words when 12 will do? Grew up with pop in the Midwest and they call it Coke in Texas. Chris Dixon calls it soda. Matt Covey says soda, but my family in Texas calls everything Coke. Hey, there we go. We even have someone overseas right now. The Philippine Nomad Mike says over here, its brand name became common use, generic Coke. Did not know that. Thank you, Philippine Nomad. I appreciate that. So then I dug a little further, and there was a quote from a guy named Jason Katz who wrote a book about local dialects, and he went even further, and he said 6% of all Americans simply call them soft drinks, especially in Louisiana and North Carolina. And then small pockets of the Deep South call it Coca-Cola, C-O-C-O-L-A. Sounds like a slang term for Coca-Cola. So I'm thinking they probably just, I'd like a Coca-Cola, please. That was the best one. And then in Boston, some really old people call it tonic, which a lot of the older residents grew up saying. So I thought that was kind of cool. So as I was putting this together, Barrett calls it nectar of the gods. Yes, nothing wrong with that. Although bourbon's pretty close. One more thing I thought of that I wanted to cover. A couple. The recycling and why the hell, here's a question for you guys. Why can you buy a 2-liter bottle of pop or soda or Coke for typically less money or the same price as what we would call a 600 milliliter or what is that, 12 ounces? Somebody help me out there. But so a small bottle is typically the same price or even a little more than your 2-liter take-home bottles. So I did some digging. There was a good Reddit feed that I pulled this out of. But really, when it comes down to it, and for any of us who are, anarcho-capitalists or just capitalists in general, it's economy of scale for starters. So they sell, I looked it up, most companies sell the most 2-liter pop bottles, but by volume, they sell just as much pop in cans as they do 2-liter pop bottles. But the smaller bottles, the grab-and-go bottles, are significantly smaller. So they sell less of them, which means the price needs to be a little bit higher. Now, the smaller bottles also use more plastic per milliliter of liquid. So more cost. Here's another reason. Typically, Small bottles are refrigerated in the stores, so the cost to store them is a little bit higher. Most 2-liter bottles are on the shelf, which we're used to. And then people tend to pay more for convenience. So if they're going into a grocery store, they're like, I just need this to drink all by myself. Now, in high school, I wouldn't say that I didn't do that with a 2-liter pop bottle on occasion, but typically it's just a grab and go. People pay for the convenience. But there's also more work to bottle 4 small bottles as there is 1 2-liter. So there's more labor, more expense involved, and it's less efficient to ship a bunch of small bottles as it is to ship a less amount of bigger bottles. So all that to be said, convenience, expense, and the fact that economies of scale work there. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then really finally, I wanted to look at the recycling end of things, because you really don't know how many of these damn bottles are actually recycled. Are they even worth recycling? I'm not sure. I'm asking a legitimate question. But the numbers out there say that around 9%, slide back, Tim. Somewhere between 9 and 30% of all pop bottles are recycled. So split the difference, you got 20% of pop bottles that are recycled. Whatever. Pop bottles are made out of PET plastic. I already tried to do that for you, but most bottles that are recycled aren't even turned into new pop bottles. That's the biggest issue. They're mostly shipped offshore, shredded up, made into plastic pellets, and then turned into rugs, clothing, bags, and those wonderful white plastic straps that they put around heavy cardboard boxes that just want to cut your hands every time you go to open them. So that's what happens to them. From conception in the late 60s, from a guy dumping pop into a laundry basket, to shipping them to China, well, not even China anymore, and having them recycled into the bane of my existence, those finger-cutting plastic straps. So that brings us to the part that everybody really loves. Yeah, I thought so too. Chris Dixon says that is a surprisingly low number. Yep, I agree. So I did some digging, guys, and I found us 12 gadgets on Amazon that will allow you to make the best use of 2-liter bottles, whatever you do with them. And then I got 41 uses of how to reuse these old bottles. So let's dive into them and have a little bit of fun with them. But so the first one was, your typical Gatorade style bottle. You put it on and it has that pop up and squeeze out so you can turn it into a water bottle. You can buy lids like that on Amazon. You can screw on and turn it into a hockey style, or for my American friends, baseball or football style water bottles. So, hey, Mike's back over on Facebook now. Good to have you. So that's the first one. The second one was kind of cool. So for those, actually, I read an article that said that Pepsi has just redesigned the 2-liter pop bottle for the first time in 30 years to make it more rigid, but narrower in the middle. Still holds 2 liters, uses the same amount of plastic, but it's much easier for people with small hands to grab a hold of. I don't know. Anyway, you can buy a handle on Amazon if that's a real problem for you that fits around it like an old-fashioned lemonade pitcher, so you can pour your liquidy goodness like an old lemonade pitcher. That's kind of cool. Then you can buy singular or modular racks that will hold them, which would be great when we talk about storing water in them. So, they have an individual square one, or then you can stack them up as high as you want, or then you can go buy cubes of them as well. Then there was this thing I saw. I'd never knew they existed. Apparently they've been around for like 40 years, but they call it a pump fizz keeper. So it screws on. Let's pretend this other bottle of bourbon sitting here is a 2-liter pop bottle. You screw the lid on and then you pump it. You go boop, 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 like that. And it pressurizes it so that the carbon dioxide doesn't escape when you open it, I guess. Thought it was kind of cool. They had another one where it sits on a table. You drop the 2-liter pop bottle in it, and it acts like a dispenser. I don't know, an upside down pop dispenser. To me, that just seems like you're asking for trouble. I don't know. Also, a seltzer. Them old fashioned, you always seen them in the 50s and 60s movies. They'd have the handle and you'd spray it in somebody's face, like something the Three Stooges would do. Well, they make those for pop bottles. You can also get a bamboo drying rack for pop bottles. So if you're trying to wash out the sugary goodness from your pop so that you can store water in it, you want to put it in on there. They'll dry, just to keep them from getting scuzzy and gross. They have a bird feeder screw-on adapter, which I think is pretty cool. So you just, throw it here, screw it on, and you're done. Renegade Butcher says, home brewing can occur in these bottles. Yes, they can. I bought a bunch of brown pop bottles made for home brewing years ago, but you absolutely can use it. The big thing is to keep them out of daylight, because the clear bottles tend to, the sun interacts with the home brewing and can make it skunky pretty quick. So if you need to, use the green bottles, although I've heard that Sprite and 7-Up are going away from the green bottles anyway. I don't know. So they make a bird feeder screw-on adapter that allows you to put bird seed in, flip it over, and happy birds. They make a cyclone adapter. You guys remember those from physics class in high school? Allows you to screw 2 pop bottles together. You put some color in it, and you spin it around, and it turns into like a science experiment for the kids. They have color-coded lids for parties. So if you're going to a party with, apparently this is a thing now where kids take 2-liter bottles or a gallon jug and drink out of it so that people can't drug them or something. Anyway, they have color-coded lids for that. If you're getting old like me and you got arthritis, then they have these plastic, look like you could 3D print them almost, but they fit on top of a 2-liter pop bottle and crank it open. And then they have a rubber slide-on watering nozzle. Now, we're going to talk about how you can make these yourself anyway, but they look like those, if you've ever seen old tubs that didn't have a place to hook up a shower, and they would have these stretch over ones. They would stretch over the nozzle, the fill nozzle for the tub, and then you could put it up. That's what it looks like, just a cheap version of that. But you could dump it on, and then, if all you had was a 2-liter pop bottle, you could use it for your watering can. Pipin says Sprite is now in a clear bottle. I avoid buying it because I thought it was Diet Sprite or something. That makes sense. And Philippine says, I only soda I occasionally drink is 7-Up and Coke and rum. Yes, well, the rum cancels it out, so you're all set. So, but yeah, there's a bunch of kind of cool Amazon gadgets you can buy that work well for it. But what I really wanted to dive into were all the uses for reusing, instead of necessarily drinking the pop out of the bottle, but turning it into something new, reusing it, maybe keeping it from, the landfill, or turning it into something good. Rachel Brown says, just bottle your homebrew in Corona quart bottles. Brown bottles work better. For sure. I used to use Corona bottles for home brewing. Funny story there. But I don't know if they were old, but they wanted to break off every time you try to pop the lid. So the first reusable option for 2-liter pop bottles, and if you guys have seen these, this was actually my buddy Danny from out east. When I went out to his place, it was last year, he was showing me on his fence. He had a vertical mounted garden. And basically, there are a bunch of 2-liter pop bottles, sit on their side, cut the top off, and you could grow stuff in them. And then they were all basically chained together somehow, so that if you overwatered them, the water would come down and then drip into the next one and the next one and the next one. Renegade Butcher says birdhouses. I didn't specifically have that in there, so that's a good one. And Pipin is quietly sipping rum and Sprite. Yes, I can't blame you. So I thought that was kind of cool. Another one that a lady mentioned on a homesteading site was, and Becky and I used to make this, but homemade liquid laundry detergent. So if you guys have ever made that, we basically used, I think it was Fells Napta soap, but you could also use Ivory. You grate it up, you add it washing soda, water, cook it all together, some essential oils, and then we were making it for like $1 or $2 for a great big jug of it. So if you need something to store it in, of course, you're going to need a funnel, which we'll talk about in a bit, but store that in your 2-liter pop bottles. Another one was a bird feeder. So there's a few different options, but I told you the one where you screw the base on and you hang it from a tree. Well, this one was a sideways bird feeder. So you'd put the feed in and you'd stick some, look like doweling through it, and then hang it up, and it would work good. Might be something that we'll think about doing at the daycare. Flower planters, cut the top off, set it down. You have a perfectly balanced little item that you can put your plants in. I always thought that was kind of neat. Hummingbird feeder, those are dead simple. I've seen those. They also make waterers, small water, chick waterers for 2-liter pop bottles that will screw on. Those work really good. Hummingbird feeders, of course, when you make the nectar for them, make sure that you drain them out or clean them out once in a while, because they'll get nasty and they'll attract all kinds of hornets. Rachel Brown says Fells Napta can now be bought pre-shredded. So it's kind of like cheese. They'll probably add some sort of fibrous material to it and charge you an upcharge. But no, I'm just kidding. I did not know they did that. You can tell a lot of people are making their own laundry soap now, if that's the case. Next was a homemade water sprinkler, and that was the one you saw in the thumbnail for the video. And that is as simple as it comes. Just screw a hose onto it. Probably going to need to take some of the handyman secret weapon, red greens duct tape, go around, cinch it down, and then poke a whole bunch of tiny holes in the pop bottle, pressurize it, and they spray out like a poor man's sprinkler. And Philippine Nomad says locals here reuse 2-liter pop bottles for filling, refilling gas, diesel, fuel for small motors. I can see that. Dad used to do that. They used to take 2-liter glass bottles in the 70s to the gas station to get gas. I can't imagine that's a great idea. But yeah. Rachel Brown says she does the self-watering planter. And, I didn't learn something new here too. Renegade Butcher says, I need some more Fells Napta. Best thing to wash with you, get exposed to poison ivy or oak. And Matt Covey says it will also ferment and get the hummingbirds drunk, which, yes, I agree. Now, this one was one of the coolest ones I saw. There's probably about 5 or 6 that just jumped out at me while I was doing this. This was simple, a grocery bag dispenser. So you cut the base off just at the bottom, hang it upside down, and just put a little flap over the top, hang it on the wall, and you just shove it full of grocery bags. And then you can just either pull them out of the top or pull one at a time out the bottom through the hole. I thought that was pretty ingenious. Another one was drip irrigation for houseplants while you're away. So you put it in the with the neck of the bottle, bury it down in the soil. If you want to slow it down, you can put some cloth or something in there. And it kind of works similar to wicking beds and that sort of thing. Put it down, fill the water, and it will slowly wick out into the soil. Worth it. This one here, this one's just for you, Josh, but making single strand or woven cordage. I think it was the Russian hacker maybe that I saw first. But you just basically, you can just take your knife and put your knife, stick it in a tree or a stump or something, and put it down, put the pop bottle on a stake, and then start pulling it off. You want to have about a 1/4 inch wide, and you can get a ton of cordage out of a single 2-liter pop bottle. And then, if you want, you can take multiple strands, weave it together. I was going to say wove it together. Weave it together, and you can have super strong cordage. Pipin says, 2-liter pop bottle makes a good funnel when cut apart. You are right. I got that in the list, and I've used it many, many times. Hey, John Palmer, good to have you. And Renegade says, waterproof container. Oh, that's a good one. Waterproof container for storing documents somewhere. Or I suppose if you're out in a boat and you needed to store something that would float, that would work too now, wouldn't it? See how many times I can say that in my Canadian accent. A terrarium, so a totally enclosed plant system. Dead simple, easy to do. I thought that would be kind of interesting. You can use, if you guys haven't seen this, a 2-liter pop bottle as an egg yolk separator. So you take it, you squeeze it out, you kind of compress it a bit, set it over top of the egg yolk in the bowl, and just pop it open, and it will suck the egg yolk up and out of there. One of the simplest, easiest ways to do it. Renegade says they sell tools now to thread the bottles into cordage. I might have to try that. Maybe it'd be a project me and the girls can do. Use the top half as a bag sealer. So if you haven't seen that, you basically cut off the neck and the shoulder of a bottle. You pull a Ziploc bag up through it, and then you can screw the lid on. So you basically have a bag underneath for storage, but a sealable, resealable top to it. That's pretty ingenious. Piggy bank for kids or for adults if you're looking to fill it full of, I don't even know. Loonies and toonies, not that you guys have them, wouldn't fit in there, but dimes, nickels, and, well, we don't have pennies either, but you could fit something in there. Or you could turn it on its side, put a slit in it, and dump it in that way. This one was pretty cool. It was another Russian hacker type thing. Hand washing station. So what you do is you just hang the 2-liter pop bottle upside down with the lid on, of course, once it's full, and you back it off just a little bit so that it just drips. And then you put one hand under it, you squeeze the bottle, and the water just comes out, and then you can scrub your hands. So it would be an impromptu hand washing station. I thought it was pretty cool. Pipin says, mind blown, 2-liter bottles into cordage. Take 30 seconds to Google that on YouTube to search for it, and you will actually, it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat little survival hack type thing. In a grid down scenario, it would be a really easy way to make some pretty durable cordage. Dry food storage. This was one that was well debated on the forums that I went through. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Most people bitch because how are you supposed to get beans or rice or flour into that small little neck? But some people loved it. But the one thing you got to do, make sure the damn jug is dry. A cup or a scoop. So, if you got no other reason or you want to make a bowl, just cut it off and use the bottom. You can use it as a scoop. They're not as handy as the ones you make out of a 2-liter milk jug, but they will work. A funnel. Who mentioned that earlier? Pipin said a funnel. I've used them many times. I remember quite a few years ago when my wife and I were just married, I ran out of gas. The only time in my life I've ran out of gas. I was close to my uncle's house. I ran to get a 2-liter or a 5-gallon jug of gas. It had a lid on it, but it didn't have a nozzle. So I found a 2-liter pop bottle in the back of the van. I cut the top off it and I used it as an expedient field funnel, and it worked great. Not perfect, but great. There's another one we'll have to add to the list. Matt Covey says, I've used water bottles for storing .22 long rifle. Yes, that would be great. Renegade says, I'm very impressed by what I saw. I even saw an EDC keychain tool for making cordage from bottles. Very cool. Water storage. Now, these are all linked together here, but again, this is, I can't take credit for this one, but Jack Spirko's talked about it a bunch. Get all your 2-liter pop bottles from all your family, rinse them out really well, and they make durable, absolutely dirt cheap water storage. Renegade says crawfish and minnow traps, another one I didn't have on my list. Now, we got water storage. We also have an ice pack. So again, throw it in your freezer, freeze it solid, and you've got a very durable, very long-lasting ice pack. Speaking of freezers, you can use it as space filler in a freezer. And you might say, why do I want to do that? Because a full freezer is an efficient freezer. An empty freezer is not. So put it in there, let it freeze. You've got ice, you've got stored water, you're saving space. And if you really want to, take that 2-liter pop bottle, freeze it up till it's almost to the top, throw a quarter in on top or a penny or a dime or whatever, then put the lid on and just leave it in there. That way, if you ever go away for a long trip and the power goes out, but then it comes back on and everything thawed and froze again, you're going to know because that coin's going to be at the bottom of the ice in the bottle. Always love that one. Ice, ice, baby, Renegade says. And Pipe and says, oh, that's cool. He uses a gumball machine for storing 9mm, but that's not on topic. Doesn't matter. Still love the idea. That's why I shared it. Poor man's freezer alarm. The next one, you can use the green ones to change the color of a lamp in a kid's room for something fun and interesting. You can make a homemade slingshot with the top, cut the funnel part off, put a balloon on the back, throw the ball bearings in there, and boing! I think you could do some serious damage with that thing. Rachel Brown likes Arizona tea bottles better for water. Handle is better. Yeah, I agree. Seedling protection. So if you decide you want to challenge the gods that are frost and you put your seedlings out a little early and you need real quick protection overnight, cut the bottom out of a 2-liter pop bottle or cut the nozzle out of it, whatever you want, and throw it down over, and it could be just enough of what you need to save it. Probably the best one that I found, and I need to explain this, was a fruit picker. It was for getting things like pears, apples, and peaches up on the really high branches without climbing a tree. You take the 2-liter pop bottle, you cut a hole on the flat side, so like the long flat side where the label would be. You cut a hole in there about 1.5 to 2 times bigger than your average size of the fruit. Then you string that to a long pole, and then you put it up, scoop it over the fruit, pull it down, and you have it. I thought that was one of the most ingenious uses of a 2-liter pop bottle I have ever seen. So I thought that was kind of cool. Renegade Butcher says that He's heard that some people can make a item with a pop bottle that will make boomsticks less boomy. Interesting. Also, you can fill them full of water or sand and use them for weights to weight down things like tablecloths or the edges of, summer tents, that kind of thing. Thought that was kind of cool. Plastic bottle greenhouse. These were really neat. You can use clear or green, but you just string them all down through long sticks and build the entire walls out of them, and they reflect the sun a little bit better. You can use them as a heat battery for plants overnight. So paint half of one of them or the full thing black, leave it in direct sunlight all day, and then lay them in your plant beds at night, and it will help store the sunlight and heat a little bit longer to help protect and warm up your plants just that much more. The one we love to use at the daycare is a hornet trap. You hang it up, put some nasty old sugar water in there, and watch the buggers just go in and never come out. Bottle rocket. So I've never done one of those. They look like they're kind of fun. You can buy kits online that will basically pressurize it. You put fins on it, and it will go flying up really quick. That'd be kind of fun. Homemade hot water bottle. Fill it full of exceptionally as hot as you can stand water. Seal it up really tight, and then throw it under your blankets for the evening. Saves you from buying something if you don't need to. This one was really cool too. Shop organizers. So you can do it out of 1 liter or 2 liter bottles. You put an eye hook through the lid of the 2 liter bottle. That hangs it on the pegboard. And then on the front at the top, you put a hole in it big enough for your hand to go in. So then you got 2/3 of the 2 liter pop bottle. You could put wooden biscuits in there, dowel joiners. They had nuts, washers, nails, all of that. It was one of the neat ways I saw to organize hardware in a workshop that didn't involve leftover Cheese Whiz jars and that sort of thing. So kind of cool. What do we got here? A drip snagger for underneath of water and juice dispensers. This one was a bit of a stretch, but you basically leave the bottom feet of a 2 liter bottle and then cut the back sleeve out and leave a hole. Hang it over the nozzle like you would have on, say, a Berkey water filter. Set it down there so when people fill it up and it doesn't drip on the floor. That was kind of cool. Renegade says they make good mini greenhouses for starts during a surprise frost. Yeah, I figured they would. Snack bowls for kids. Cut the bottom off and then take a lighter and melt all the sharp edges so that it's nice and smooth. And then they can eat their Doritos or whatever you want out of it. I thought it was interesting. Fill them full of gravel and use them as a doorstop. Again, kind of cool. A makeshift water filter. Fill it full of charcoal. So you got charcoal and a coffee filter, and dump the water down through. And in theory, you have clean water. Byron says storage for paracord. Yes, I bought mine on a 300-foot roll, but if I had a bunch loose, it would be a great way to store it for sure. Renegade Butcher says, step 1, fill 2 liter bottle with concrete and insert a dowel. Waiting for step 2. Sounds interesting. And then number 41, the final one. This was really, really cool. Building material. So there was a bunch of different ways people in, especially the third world countries, were making houses out, of 2 liter pop bottles. A few different ways, but one was to make them full of sand. Basically, the idea was to fill the bottles full of some sort of material, cheap, inexpensive, local material. Then stack them, then fill them, chink the centers full of either like some sort of stucco or caulking or whatever. A lot of places were taking them and filling them full of mud. So they make basically a 12-inch wall full of stacked up 2 liter pop bottles full of mud, let it harden, and then stucco over the whole thing. So either you left the front and bottom ends or the front and back ends of the bottle out that would show through the construction, or you'd stucco over the whole thing and you wouldn't even know. And what you'd have is a 12-inch wall that was made out of local materials that didn't cost a whole lot at all. Pipin says, a cement-weighted 2 liter could be a good tie-down for a pop-up tent. Yes, it could. There was actually a guy that, where I grew up, used to make cement, cement mushroom designs that he would sell. He had a stainless steel salad bowl that made the top, And the bottom was a 2-liter pop bottle with the neck cut off. Fill them full of Portland cement, let them harden, put the two together, paint them, and sell them for less than he probably should have. And then Renegade Butcher had the best life hack of the evening. Step 1, fill 2-liter pop bottle with concrete. Insert dowel. Step 2, slay enemies. Step 3, profit. If that doesn't scream capitalism, my friend, no, I love it. That's great. So that was 41 uses for old 2-liter pop bottles, 12 Amazon gadgets, and a stroll down the lane of history with 2-liter pop bottles. Who would have thought, at least I don't know, who would have thought that something as mundane and everyday as 2-liter pop bottles would have such an interesting and storied history? But when it comes down to it, all of that stuff, we take for granted the day-to-day, every, it's like the 5-gallon buckets. How many of those do you see on the side of the highway while you're driving? Because I was listening to book 9 of Going Home the other day, because we're doing in about a week and a half, I believe, book 9 in the Post-Apocalyptic Book Club. And he talked about how he borrowed a 5-gallon bucket full of vegetables from a guy. He didn't steal it. They were lent to him. And he made a point of saying, hey, I will return. Morgan, the protagonist, said, I will return this 5-gallon bucket. And then he has some internal dialogue afterwards saying how rare it is to find a top quality 5-gallon bucket at this point in the collapse, because everybody had used them for everything. So anybody who could find a good 5-gallon bucket had used it or worn it out already. And that's the same with all of this stuff. I did an exercise a while ago where I thought about breaking everything down into its basic materials. Because in a, say, collapse scenario, for instance, or even just in a off-grid preparedness scenario where you need to fix something, you need to break things down to the base material in order to figure out a way to use them. So whether that's, cutting up your tires to make, rubber patches, or again, if you needed to, patch a hole in a window, you could cut a piece of 2-liter pop bottle, cut it, flatten it out, and tape it to the window so you could still see out of it. But it's all about looking at what we call garbage now and realizing how much more important it could be in a bad case scenario. Take it or leave it, whatever you want to do with, reduce, reuse, recycle. I just think that it's prudent to reuse things so that you don't have to buy something new. Because every dollar you don't have to spend is a dollar you save, which is a dollar, in Nicole's words, in the Independence Fund, which means I didn't have to spend it. Or even better, I didn't have to earn it. So that's why I like these exercises in thought, for sure. So beyond that, guys, that's what I had for you this evening. What do we have coming up this week? Well, tomorrow evening will be episode 6 of the Last of Us recap show with my beautiful wife, Mrs. Toolman, Becky. We'll be on tomorrow night, same time. Saturday evening, I am on with my good buddy, Carrie Brown. We are going to do a second edition of Extraterrestrial Radio, where we are going to review the life and times of the very famous Art Bell of Coast to Coast fame. We're going to pick some more interesting things that he's done, stories that he covered, and we're going to give our thoughts on it, because it was a hugely, hugely popular show. I love talking about it. Carrie is super passionate about it. He's a dude who lived through the Coast to Coast AM radio era. You know what I think about AM radio. So we're going to be doing that. And then Sunday evening, Mr. Chuck Peoples, who was in earlier, will be on the show, and we are going to build, or he is going to help me put together a first aid kit. It's going to be a lot of fun because that's what he does. And we'll probably talk a bit about all things medical preparedness. Chris Dixon says, repurpose everything. Thou shalt scrounge. 100%. Close out with this. The other day, over a 3 or 4 day period, I got 3 phone calls from tenants. One's my son, of course, but he rents from us at this point. First, it was my son. His dryer died. Then it was Nick across town. His dryer died. Then it was Allie across town, and her washing machine died. So 3 appliances in the span of a long weekend, basically. So I had one extra dryer in storage. I swapped that out for Nick's. I brought Nick's back to the workshop and started tearing it apart. I'm going to do a little video on troubleshooting dryers because you will not believe how simple they were. But you check the thermal fuse, you check the belt, you check the start switch. None of those were bad. So fourth thing I checked, the door switch, and that's what it was. You go on certain websites, they want it $60 for the part. You take that part number, you throw it into Amazon, $16, and it should be here by next Tuesday. So when that shows up, I'm going to pop that in. I'm going to give my son that dryer, and then I'm going to attempt to fix his dryer. So I end up saving 2 dryers from the landfill for very little money. And we now have, hopefully, if the next one fixes, another dryer in the shed for a just-in-case scenario. Now, the washing machine I couldn't fix, so I called in an expert because that's what we do. If you can't fix it and you need to spend the money, holler in for an expert and go. So with that, guys, I see Clark headed out. Mike says his wife caught the Last of Us bug, and Pipin is heading to the junkyard for car parts shopping tomorrow. It's like garage selling, but for old mechanics. Yes, it's fun. I enjoy it. I haven't been to a junkyard in a long time, but my brother-in-law, he hits one up once in a while and gets pretty good deals on it. So, guys, this was fun. Thank you. I always love it. There's a lot of research, again, that goes into these empty container episodes, but Thursdays, I just love to, I put my heart and soul into every episode, but these empty container ones are a lot of fun. They're a lot like the history of preparedness as well. So that's it for me this evening, guys. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.